Amber, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, I saw your Substack piece, excellent Substack. Everyone in the audience needs to go be reading. If they want to really improve their IQ, if they want to IQ max, they should be reading Amber Duke's
So true.
Substack. Your piece that you put up, I think it was yesterday, regarding the legal observers. I mean, this is something that is driving a lot of, it sort of permits a lot of these leftists to agitate, to cause problems. And it sort of ticks the protests into something else, where it's not just a protest; it adds an extra element to it. Could you maybe expand on, your piece in regards to maybe familiarize the audience with legal observers for those who aren't, and how this ties into the situation that we saw in Minneapolis?
Yes, absolutely. So the term legal observers, which the audience has probably seen being thrown around by a bunch of mainstream media outlets and left-wing activists, comes from campus protests in the 1960s. It was popularized by the National Lawyers Guild, which is a left-wing group. And they fashioned this term to refer to essentially witnesses who would be on scene at protests to film police and other officials, law enforcement officials, to make sure that they weren't basically brutalizing the protesters.
Mm-hmm.
This term was used again during the BLM riots and the anti police brutality protests that we saw about 5 to 10 years ago. And it's now being brought up again in context of the anti-ICE protests.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the problem with the term is that it implies that these are people who have some kind of training or credential and also some kind of special status that prevents them from facing consequences for illegal actions.
Mm-hmm.
These people are really just random protesters who pull out their phone and record. There's nothing special about them. And a lot of the groups who are creating these so-called legal observers are actually encouraging them to go beyond the act of filming and insert themselves in the situations, like in an ICE immigration enforcement action or other federal law enforcement proceeding.
Yeah.
So, for example, the Minnesota Ice Watch group, of which Renee Good and her wife were allegedly members, says on its Instagram that people need to basically extricate suspects from ICE custody, that they need to use their bodies and their vehicles to obstruct law enforcement officials. They need to be out there using whistles and bullhorns to try to distract and
Mm.
confuse the officers. And they are not supposed to abide by legal and lawful commands to keep a clear area around an active police scene, which is precisely why Renee Good was asked to get out of her vehicle, because she was, one, obstructing, and two, not keeping a safe distance from an ICE enforcement operation. So when we see these people being pushed away from the scene as ICE agents are trying to arrest somebody or detain somebody, well, they are allowed to do that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of states set that distance at 25 feet. Minnesota does not have a specific distance that people have to stand away, but it is clear in the law that if a uniformed officer, a law enforcement official, tells you to stand back or clear the scene, they're well within their rights to do that. And if you don't comply and are disobeying that lawful order, then you can have physical force used against you to actually remove you from the situation.
Mm, mm. Yeah, it's really bizarre because I used to do some street journalism with Alad Eliyahu, obviously one of our correspondents here at Timcast, and we would be on the streets of New York City. I was running cameras for him, so we were just documenting what was going on. There was obviously a lot of protests, a few years ago in New York City, and I met these like National Lawyers Guild people, and they wear these vests and everything. And, when you first see me coming in just completely bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, I'm like, oh, that's, interesting. These people are here making sure everything's above board, right? Like, foolishly, I was like, maybe these people are nonpartisan. I don't know. And then I found out very quickly that if they clock you as, like, conservative or just anyone that's documenting what these radical leftist protesters are doing, they clock you as an enemy, as sort of an opponent. And so what would happen was when we were, attempting to film like an arrest, or if we were, trying to have a conversation with somebody, specifically with conversations, they would come up and they'd be like, these people are bad actors. Don't talk to them. Don't give them the time of day. And so I see that and I'm like, I don't see much legal advice being disseminated here. I just see you guys as like effectively trying to provide module of, or what's the word I'm looking for, a sense of
Well,
credibility for these
yeah.
these protesters. Where did these people, I mean, you broke it down, were these people ever like nonpartisan? Were these people ever useful in any way, or was this quite literally just an apparatus set up by these leftist agitator groups?
Yeah, this was a way to protect people who were protesting, but even from the very beginning, it was selective protection and it also was meant to obscure any illegal actions from the protesters. So that's why they don't want actual independent observers or conservatives filming, because they want to be able to slice and dice the footage in the way that is most
Mm.
beneficial to the person that they are hoping to defend from legal action taken against them if they do break the law in terms of obstruction and getting involved in these precarious situations.
Mm. Yeah, so maybe you could outline. Obviously, we've seen reporting that Renee Good and her wife are at least in correspondence with these groups, these legal observer groups. As it stands right now, is it safe to say that they certainly were at least in cahoots to some degree? What do you know, sort of at the Daily Caller, what your guys' reporting is saying as far as the connection between the group and obviously Renee Good and her wife?
Yeah, all that we have right now is there's a New York Post report where they have several sources indicating that they were connected to that group. And of course, the feds are trying to investigate Becca Good, the deceased wife, her connection to those organizations, which the local police, by the way, are very upset about because they don't want the FBI to be looking into potential ties to these domestic unrest groups. But the Minnesota Ice Watch group has a lot of really fascinating stuff on their Instagram page. In addition to what I already mentioned, they also have a Instagram post that I found especially interesting in the context of our last conversation, which was about anti-white racism,
Mm-hmm.
where they actually tell specifically white members of the group to be the ones who are quote unquote putting their bodies on the line to extricate suspects from police custody.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure you can guess the explanation for that is that Black people will be more likely to be killed by the police if they decide to do that and put themselves in harm's way. And also, physical and emotional labor and all of that,
Mm-hmm.
blah, 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 gobbledygook nonsense. But when we look at it from a more objective perspective, they are actually telling white people to sacrifice themselves on the altar of Blackness, right?
Yeah.
That white people need to be the ones risking physical injury or catching federal charges to save Black people and, of course, the criminal illegal aliens from facing justice. And it's absolutely wild. There was another post I found that I think you'll find fascinating, Tate, which is that in June of 2025, so 6 months before this incident, about the Minnesota Ice Watch group posted a video of a protester confronting a man who she claims hit her with his car. So this guy was in scrubs. Looks like he was either on his way to or home from, some healthcare facility, possibly a hospital. They do not have a video of the actual incident where the guy allegedly strikes the protester, but they do admit that they were standing in an intersection that he, I guess, was trying to get his car through and may have, brushed one of them. She's chasing him down. She seems fine. And when she catches up to the vehicle, she's screaming at him through the window. They block his car and prevent him from leaving until the police come and escort him away. But the comments were hysterical because in the comments, they are talking about how this guy attempted to commit assault with a deadly weapon, that he must feel so brave being behind a 2-ton, car that could kill somebody, and talking about how dangerous what he did was. Well, what happened when one of their own was the person behind the wheel of that 2-ton hunk of steel? The exact opposite, right?
Yeah.
The police officer is ridiculous for being scared for his life. He's weak, he's pathetic, how dare him, she wasn't even trying to run him over. So we see that their apparent observation about the potential deadliness of getting hit with a car is completely flipped on its head depending on who is driving that car and who is the person standing in front of it.
It's insane. I want to ask you this. I think it's a miscalculation from a lot of conservatives where they're just lambasting all of these protesters, agitators as idiots or morons. Certainly a good component of them are, and certainly their ideology is idiotic. But something that jumped out to me was in that video that obviously went viral of Nick Sorter and Cam Higbee, where they were, reporting on the ground, and they were in their car and they got, surrounded by a mob. And, Nick had to get out of there, so he had to make an evasive maneuver. But on the way out, as he was driving out, there was that guy in the flannel shirt who jumped on top of the car in a very specific way. This wasn't like necessarily a way where he's jumping up there, he's going to bash on the glass and try to scare the guy. He kind of jumped on backwards, and then he rolled off like a stunt double. I mean, it felt like the Ryan Gosling movie, where he's the stunt double. It was very impressive. It was almost textbook Hollywood, roll off. And I see that, and I at first I'm like, that is kind of strange. I mean, maybe this guy is just bad at intimidation. But then a lot of people, obviously, that are experts on, the tactics that they use, they're saying, no, he's trying to do that. So then if the police are called, then he can say, they hit me with his car. I got thrown on top of the vehicle and it threw me off, and these sorts of things. That's like a very clever tactic. That indicates to me that these people have a lot of protocol, a lot of strategies. They unfortunately know what they're doing, and that's an extremely pernicious thing. And that's why, again, it's kind of a miscalculation almost to convince conservatives like, hey, these people are just idiots, they're just whatever. Again, the ideology is idiotic, but these people have all these tactics. They've thought this out. They've sat down, they've brainstormed, how can we get these people in trouble? How can we get these people in handcuffs?
That's exactly right. And they are receiving training on how to do precisely that, how to make themselves the victim in any scenario and get away from the consequences that would usually come with that type of obstruction. So it's throwing yourself on top of the car. It's, claiming when the police officer is detaining you that you can't breathe or you need medical attention.
Yeah.
It's the people standing around a ICE officer detaining an illegal alien and demanding to see a warrant as if you're like a federal judge or something. It's all kinds of tactics like that. There was a video recently that was going viral where people were claiming that a woman was pulled out of her car as she was trying to get to her doctor's appointment. And I noticed in that video, and I can't speak whether or not this woman had a doctor's appointment, but I did find it a little curious that she stops and blocks traffic in the middle of this law enforcement proceeding. She refuses orders to drive through. She sits there and starts arguing with the officers. And it's only after she gets pulled out of the vehicle that she starts screaming about this alleged doctor's appointment and how she's disabled, right? And so to me, that's a little too neat and calculated to only bring that up after you're detained by officers. And it seems quite in line with the typical tactics that are used by these protesters.
Yeah, I mean, that's very I know these guys, Sword or Higbee, these guys are pros, so they're very keenly aware of this. But, a lot of people are going to be inspired by a lot of this great work these guys are doing, and they're getting out there. And I think they might underestimate, how capable these people are of trying to get you in trouble, especially in these jurisdictions where, Minneapolis Police Department is not playing ball with conservatives. That is certainly not the case.
I think if there's one thing that they are idiots about, to go back to your previous point, I think a lot of people like Renee Good and her wife, especially the liberal white women, have been misled about the seriousness of what they're doing.
That's true.
And and because they're in a place like Minneapolis, where, like you said, the judges will, give them a slap on the wrist. The prosecutors might not even prosecute. They might get at worst a citation. I don't think any of them comprehended that if you try to flee the scene when you're being detained and hit an officer with your car, that the punishment could be death.
Right.
I don't think they ever comprehended that an officer might use deadly force against them. They think that they're kind of playing a fun game, right? The cleverness with which they're approaching these situations is cute and it's funny, and we see the smug faces of the liberal white women in their car across all the videos that have been shared on social media recently. And I don't think any of them thought that it could get to the point where they were either facing serious jail time or potentially a death sentence.
Yeah.
And so when people are talking about, why would you put yourself in that situation, particularly when you have children? I suspect it's because these groups have convinced them that the worst thing that will happen to them is they'll spend a night in jail, and their lawyer activist group will help make sure they never have to face any real consequences.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I mean, why wouldn't they believe they could operate with impunity? Because they had riots 5 years ago, and barely any consequence was really, had for any of these people that were doing these sorts of things. There's a new sheriff in town, so again, all we're really doing is just like that's like obvious. You can't hit officers with your car, but for those people who live in a place like Minneapolis, they were like, hey, in 2020 you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to do whatever you want. Why would they expect the rules to change? Something also really interesting, in addition to sort of them not understanding that they're not operating without impunity, is there's something to be said about the fact that people like Renee Good are willing to effectively put their bodies on the line for fraud, like literal criminals, literal fraudsters. Because the whole fiasco in Minneapolis started from the Nick Shirley video, where he just went around and he was like recording very obvious fraud in daylight. Obviously, Tim Waltz, gets scalped in the process. It's so amazing to me because then Noam responded by sending in DHS agents saying, okay, we need to mop this mess up because Tim Waltz and Jacob Frey are clearly not serious people. They sent in the DHS, again, to mop up the situation. And that's how the protests and then eventually riots start, is over all of that. So what does that say about our country, that you literally just have fairly ordinary middle-aged men and women, like quite literally putting their bodies on the line for people that hate them? I mean, they hate them enough to defraud them of their taxpayer dollars. I mean, this is just like the most insane self-hatred I think I've ever seen.
Yeah, and they hate them because they are now saying that you cannot use the phrase "say her name" in response to Renee Good's death, because that's reserved for Black women.
Wow.
And how dare they use that for a white woman?
Yeah.
So yeah, like if you're a white woman, you are like the scum on the bottom of their shoe.
Yeah.
Like, they want you to use yourself as like a meat puppet to block ICE, and whatever happens to you, they don't care. So it really is crazy. I mean, my theory about the liberal white woman thing has always been that a lot of them do not have families, and the ones that do have, sort of weird family dynamics and structures. Like in this case, Renee Good was reportedly divorced twice prior to meeting her wife. She was married to Ben. She has 3 kids, but I guess only has full custody of one of them. And they tend to use the sort of female empathy that they normally would on their families to protect who the liberals tell them is the external marginalized victim. So in terms of like the psychology behind it, I think that's a lot of what's happening. But it really is wild to see the type of people that they are defending. In addition to the Somali fraudsters, I mean, there were cases where ICE was picking up literal pedophiles, drug traffickers, and they're out there protesting. I mean, the incident I mentioned earlier where the doctor or nurse had allegedly hit one of these anti-ICE protesters with his car, the reason they were out in the street that day, I found the action that was taking place. Mayor Jacob Frey even admitted it actually wasn't even an immigration operation that they were protesting. It was actually a federal and local police operation to take down a $25 million meth operation. So they were out there really trying, they're serving a warrant on this massive meth den. And we had anti-ICE people out there basically acting like they were taking away, their nanny. And so there's just so much ignorance and misinformation that is being fed through these groups, from Democratic politicians to the, useful, clever, but idiotic people who are out there actually doing the work of trying to obstruct the proceedings.
Right. Absolutely. Well, I want to do this. So obviously our last conversation, we took a position on the story that maybe wasn't as in vogue, because at the time with the compact piece, and it was a good piece, but, we described it as a permission piece. We said there were some issues with the article. The framing was bad. I think, again, I'll see if you agree with me. I'm taking a position on this that maybe isn't in vogue. It's kind of cuts against what a lot of the popular conservative commentary is, but I believe this to be true, is something that's interesting to me. I have this sort of framework, other people coined it, but I use this framework of the idea of safe edgy, where people sort of want to be perceived as edgy, have like a heterodox opinion, and so they just like go all out on a group because again, people see it and go, wow, this guy's like really pushing against the mainstream, but they're actually obfuscating from sort of what would actually be edgy, what would actually be sort of the real underlying issue. So what I've seen in response to the Renee Good situation is that people are going on and on about Karens, and really when they're talking about Karens, they're just talking about middle-aged white women broadly, liberal or conservative, and they're positioning Karens as if they were like the number one issue in the United States, and that like Karens are really like holding back society and whatnot. And from my perspective, I'm like, yes, liberal white women, they have this borderline suicidal tendency to defend these people that absolutely hate them. But when you look at like white middle-aged women as a voting bloc, they're like 50-50. Like they're not this brainwashed, HR lady. And so what I'm seeing on the conservative side is a lot of people just want to attack them because it's safe. It's like, okay, this is a group that can be perceived as edgy to attack, but it's not actually getting at the bigger issue, which is like a large reason a lot of these cities are really unsafe is black crime. And we saw this with the Irina Zarutska situation, but these people, they won't address that because it's just much easier and safer to just attack middle-aged white women. And like in the audience, people in our lives, like we know these women, they're like half of them are patriots. I mean, like, what are you going to do? I don't know if you agree with me on that, but it's just frustrating for me to see like the all-out vitriol against Karens, and then they like obfuscate from these other groups that are causing, a lot of problems. There are the conversations like whether it's cultural policy, et cetera, et cetera. It's just weird that Karens are receiving all the ire in the current zeitgeist.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, they focus on the sort of the cover up or the permission structure for minority people to behave a certain way without consequence, and not the behavior of the minority group.
Right.
And like, I'm going to go to bat for Karens a little bit because there's a positive side to being a Karen. Yes, there's the Karen who is blowing a whistle at an ICE agent, but there's also the Karens who are calling in suspicious things that they see on the street that are helping to keep people safe. There's the Karens who switch to a different subway car when someone who is clearly acting weird and aggressive is sitting next to them, right? There's the see something, say something Karen. There's the Karens who don't stand for litter and loitering and all of these quality of life crimes in their neighborhoods. So I do think it cuts both ways, and lumping all of these people into the same group is not particularly helpful from a public policy standpoint.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's the best way to put it is like, addressing the permission structure without addressing the underlying issue of why there has to be permission structure in the first place. Because I think about it, this is like on Timcast, I have a few takes that the audience hates. I have my take on pit bulls and very anti-pit-bull.
Me too.
Tattoos, marijuana. I'm a prude. I'm very willing to admit that.
We're kindred spirits, Tate.
Yeah, exactly. But the Karen, I'm kind of tactically pro Karen because I think about it. I'm like, you won't know what you had until they're gone. And it's like, do you know how bad restaurants are going to get when you don't have Karens like, just crashing out all the time? Like, it's going to get ugly. And again, I get it. I worked in retail. I understand how annoying some of these people can be, but they kind of keep everything moving. They're the only people left in America that have like standards. Maybe they're too high. I don't know. That's a conversation we have, but they have standards. And like, I'm from Memphis, Tennessee. When I think about what the issues are in Memphis, Tennessee, why 80% of the city is like off limits, I'm not thinking about like Karens. Like, that's not like what jumps to mind of like what's like really causing me problems in Memphis. But conservatives is like all they want to talk about because again, it's like safe, edgy. You're just like, you get a really good line in on Karens, and everyone's like, yeah, screw them, like, whatever. And it's like, what are we doing?
No, I totally agree. I mean, like, if we could tie this to the pit bull conversation, like, am I a Karen if I'm walking around my neighborhood and I'm upset that someone's not following leashing laws for their giant dog?
Yeah.
Like, maybe, but
it's
also,
called the first
am I right?
world.
Yes. Yeah. And if I go to a restaurant and they have a 20% COVID safety surcharge and I dispute it on my bill, am I being a Karen? Like, yeah, again, maybe, but also we shouldn't have to pay that, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's a reason why women complaining has probably been a net good for society in a lot of ways. And sometimes it goes too far, but being that sort of mouthy person who's willing to kind of point out when something's not right is also really important. And it's how we keep our society from falling into total decay. And I'm pro HOA too. I'm a member of my HOA board, right?
So good.
Because like I live in a townhome, right? My property value is directly tied to both the two houses that are attached to mine and also the rest of the neighborhood. If someone decides to have a bunch of junk cars in front of their house with the wheels off, and my neighbor's trying to sell their home, like who's going to look out for them?
Real.
This has to be a group effort. So I do think the anti-Karen narrative does kind of cut at this idea that like communities don't really matter and we're all just super hyper individualistic.
So true. That is so true. Like it's a leftist. People are using leftist arguments when they're like attacking Karens, where they're like, oh yeah, they uphold basic societal standards. Like, yeah, that's good actually. I'll go full. I'll go full woke feminist libtard. I'll make this point. If you and me were at lunch and the food came and it was incorrect, if I pointed that out, if I caused a problem, I was like, hey, waiter, like it's not the right order. People would be like, wow, this guy's really standing up for himself. This guy, he has like expectations for what he's paying for. If you did that, they'd say, Amber's such a Karen. Like what?
Yeah.
Let bygones be bygones. Maybe that's my most liberal take I have, but I do think like women, unfortunately, just are so quick to be lambasted as a Karen for like expecting their food to be correct as they ordered it and these sorts of things.
Yeah, I agree. And I see this a lot among younger millennials and Gen Z that they're so scared of being labeled Karens that they don't ask for the basic things that they're paying for. Like they will not send a meal back. I mean, I'm on Reddit all the time and I see people who are like, was I too aggressive because my meal came out and it had the mayonnaise on it and I asked for no mayonnaise and my friend said that I was crazy for sending it back. Like, what are we doing?
Yeah. Like it really gets to the fundamental issue. This is a completely different topic, but it's so true. I mean, we got to hit on this before we go. Is people are uncomfortable with advocating for themselves anymore, and this actually does kind of tie into the self-hatred that's driving a lot of these like liberal white women, but people at large. Is people just have a really bad perception of themselves, and when you have that, you're never going to advocate for yourself because you're never going to believe that you deserve things. You deserve standards. You deserve to be treated correctly. And so that's like really the fundamental issue with Zoomers is they're so black-pilled, they're so nihilistic, or they're nihilists, is that they just don't even feel the desire or urge to advocate for yourself. And it's like you're going to get completely thrown around by life. You're going to get completely ran over if you don't. Again, it's not saying you got to like make it everyone's problem because they didn't have a lemon in your water or whatever, but like speak up. Like you got to advocate for yourself a little bit. You got to take up the space that you are existing in the world.
Yeah, so let's tie this together real quick. You got the person who asked for no mayonnaise on their sandwich and they don't say anything because the waiter just must have known that I should eat it with mayonnaise. And it's the same thing with the people who, secretly are uncomfortable with crime and uncomfortable with certain characters on the subway, but they look at the reaction from the liberal social media zeitgeist and they say, no, I must be the one who's wrong. I must be crazy. I've got to listen to them. I think it's a lot of the same mindset going on there.
Absolutely. Well, when the permission piece comes out in Black Crime from the Washington Post, you'll be the first person I call.
I love it.
Great. Well, Amber, thank you so much for hopping on. This is a blast as always. Where can people find you and where can people find that fantastic Substack article?
Yes, so they can find my work at dailycaller.com, and my Substacks are just under my own name, Amber Marie Duke, but they also get cross-posted on the Daily Caller Substack, which you should definitely become a paid subscriber to. It's called State of the Day. We've got banger newsletters just like mine coming out every single day. They can also follow me on X at Amber Marie Duke.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amber. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. All right. Well, that was the great Amber Duke. Yeah, it's so good. It's so good that someone else is, because I feel like I'm just a crazy person. When I'm like seeing something that's so obvious with the Karens, I'm like, agreed. The original description of Karen, yeah, that's annoying. Like someone that's just cranky and whatever, PMS, et cetera, et cetera. But like it's gone way too far. We're like now we're just being racist towards white people. Like it's literally anti-white sentiment driving this, where it's like if a white woman, expects like crime to be minimal, then she's a Karen. Like it's crazy what's going on. So I'm so thankful Amber just walked with me down that route because it's so true. If anything, I just kind of throw out like kind of garbled like an idea, and then she knows what I'm talking about, and then she just like frames it perfectly, and she intellectualizes it perfect. So yeah, people are going to be, people are going to be hating. People are going to be, doubting the Karen defense, but it's true. It's just objectively true. I'm sorry. I hate that it is the way it is. But I just hit that table hard. Follow me on X and Instagram at Real Tate Brown. And we'll be back tonight for Timcast IRL at 8 p.m. Be there or be square, and we'll see you later.